There we go. My name is Daniel Matanda. I am part of the Tertiary Refugee Student Network, and we are co-hosting this webinar with the UNHCR. So today's session marks a pivotal point in the road towards our 15 by 30 conference next month, which will be held in Istanbul. Today, and together, we'll begin to develop a shared research agenda, one that's designed to strengthen the case for refugee higher education, not just in principle, but through robust and meaningful evidence. So the objectives for today are threefold. First is to take stock of available data and evidence on refugee higher education. Second is to identify the most critical information gaps in research, data collection, and resource availability. And third is to begin drafting a collaborative global research agenda, one that participants can align with their work, make pledges towards, and gain recognition for advancing in terms of in multifaceted ways that we'll identify as we go on. So if we go to the next slide, I'll quickly outline our agenda. So shortly, I'll go through what the state of play is in terms of refugee higher education data and evidence. I'll pass to Alana, who will speak to the highlights of the responses we received. When you were registering, we asked a series of questions related to the refugee higher education research agenda. We're very pleased to be hosting a range of speakers who I'll introduce shortly. So Mai Nasrallah from Mosaic Education, Professor Abdullah Yassin from Polytechnic University, and Sam Pordell, for a student from Warwick University, and is also part of the STAR network. We'll have breakout rooms where you will be invited to actively participate in identifying key research gaps and topics, and then a closing discussion where we'll bring all of these learnings together and look towards the 15 by 30 conference. So this won't be a passive webinar. We're inviting everyone to participate throughout. There'll be moments for discussion, reflection, input, and we'll be drawing insights from many of the insights that you'll share throughout the webinar and drawing from what you shared in the registration forms. So just to go into the state of play, next slide, please. So as we know, the power of evidence to inform policy, to drive funding, to shape programs, and to tell the real stories behind statistics cannot be overstated. Yet many of us in this virtual space will know that data often is fragmented, sometimes outdated, or even absent altogether. And that's why we are joining into this webinar. So looking ahead, we know that we've developed this 15 by 30 roadmap where we're aiming for 15% of refugee youth to be in higher education by 2030. At the moment, this is around 7%, but as of 29, but this has gone up over the last few years, and we aim to continue to see how we can increase that percentage over the remaining 5 years up to the 2030 goal. So key evidence insights is that, as I've mentioned, awareness of tertiary opportunities, awareness of these opportunities motivates secondary school completion. This is a key motivator or driver towards educational attainment. Higher education is linked to self-reliance, employment, social cohesion. Tertiary education boosts productivity, civic engagement, and health. Next slide, please. In terms of trends and improvements, there is more disaggregated data by region, pathways, gender. This is something that is incredibly useful as we design our policies and programs. There are increase in tools that are validated, that increase in tools that validate credentials, such as the European Qualifications Passport for Refugees and the UNESCO Qualifications Passport for Refugees and Vulnerable Migrants. There are a growing number of refugee student-led research initiatives, and we'll be hearing from some of our speakers who are great examples of that. And in terms of strategic imperatives, we are hoping to strengthen longitudinal data tracking, to increase impactful research, to embed how we measure and evaluate our work in our program design, and to invest in refugee research for accountability. Next slide, please. So I'll pass now to my colleague, Alana, who will speak to the key insights from the registration forms, from your answers to the question of why research questions keep you up at night. Alana.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for that introduction and kicking us off today. And thank all of you so much again for attending this important discussion. We're eager to jump into the interactive portion and hear your insights. And to kick that off a little bit, we asked you all in registering for this webinar to share with us what you identified as some of the greatest gaps and challenges and priority needs in refugee higher education data, capacity, and research. And we received so many responses to these questions. We were really pleased to see that level of participation. And we saw responses across some similar threads and areas, but wanted to take this opportunity to highlight a few of the areas that stood out. So we saw inputs and conversation around the challenges and data needs and research priorities when it came to access to higher education, everywhere from availability of data on existing opportunities to what works and does not in program design and the progress of specific programs that are meant to be inclusive of refugees. We saw a lot of conversation and calls for data and research around postgraduate outcomes. So data on job market access, postgraduate opportunities for refugees, and what happens after refugee students complete their higher education. Across those categories and others, we also saw a huge call for impact-focused research. So what is the impact of higher education opportunities for refugees, not just in the communities that host them, but on their peers in a resettlement context, calls for a common methodology to be able to classify and report on higher education opportunities and impact. And then what is really the difference between those students, those refugee students who receive supports in scholarships or other areas to access higher education and those who don't? And are we tracking that data long term? We also saw some really interesting calls for links and some of the more theoretical conversations around what host countries can do to support refugees, some of the conversations around choice between work and study and pull factors of the perceived value of higher education for refugees and in the community at large. There was a multitude of inputs around mental health, well-being, and the psychoeducational elements of refugee integration. So really a big topic of discussion there. And then we did see a lot of points around digital higher education, the role of artificial intelligence in inclusive education for refugees, and areas around connected higher education as well. So as you can see from this, there's really a big list of inputs and areas of interest and priority, and where you all see that there's a lot of gaps in data and research. The goal today is going to be to hone in on what are our top priorities if we were to start building this collective refugee higher education research agenda. What topics would rise to the surface? So we present this as kind of the state of your thinking coming into this webinar, but really are going to challenge you to start to prioritize and call out which topics we really need to focus in on and what capacities and partnerships and resources will be needed to actually action those in the future. So with leaving you with some of those thoughts to consider throughout, I will pass it back to Daniel to introduce some of our speakers. Thanks, Daniel.
Thank you, Alana. So before I pass to our main speakers, I'll also note that we are joined by facilitators who will introduce themselves shortly. But I'd like to thank Sally Barker, Rebecca Murray, and Miriam Tahir, who will also be facilitating your breakout rooms later in the session. But first, I'll pass to our speaker, May Nashvilla. So May is joining us from Mosaic, Mosaic, which is an organization that does lots of work with refugees all across the world. But May, if I can pass to you, if you'd like to say some more about yourself and your work.
Hi, thank you. And thanks everyone for joining. I see lots of familiar names in the chat and some new ones that I hope we get to connect as part of the breakout rooms or the discussion. Okay, so yeah, my name is May, and I've been working in the youth and education space for about 10 years now. And part of my work is mosaic education, where I had programs. And I'll tell you a little bit more in the next few minutes about who mosaic education is, what our guidance program is, and then what are evidence and evidence pieces that we are interested and curious about. So if we go to the next slide, which really doesn't say much, but it asks who is Mosaic Education. And for those of you who are not familiar with our work, we're a UK-based NGO that supports refugee to reach university. So our entire mission is really focused on getting refugee into higher education and contributing to the 15 by 30 target. And we do that through two modalities, so either through university partnership or our flagship program, which is the guidance program, which I'll tell you more about. Our programs really leverage online learning, are designed with refugees, and are delivered in partnerships with local organizations. We implement programs in Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, Lebanon, and Uganda. And we particularly focus, and to be completely honest, we've been implementing the guidance program for the past 5 years, but this year specifically, I think at the end of last year, we've become more and more focused on evidence-informed programming that scales with local leadership. So I won't preach to the choir, but if we ask what is the challenge, and we can go to the next slide and the one after, actually, not preaching to the choir, we all know what the challenge is. Last year, as a reminder, the global population rose to 114 million, and only 9% of refugees reached tertiary education compared to the 42% global enrollment. And I think the reason I just wanted to include the slide to remind us all that this really underscores the urgent need for evidence on what interventions can sustainably shift access rate, particularly in emergency and protracted crisis, but also to remind us all how much we do not know about access to tertiary education. And I'll tell you a little bit about what we do know, and it will lead up to our interest in evidence. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to give you a quick overview of the flagship program, which is the guidance program. So the guidance program is really this program. I remember when I come from a refugee background myself, and I needed a scholarship to get into a BA degree that then led to a master's, a PhD. So it was really life-changing, to say the least. But in order for me to navigate that space, it really did take a village. I had no idea what I wanted to study, what I wanted to do, what are the different options, what do they even mean, how do I apply, how do I compete? And for most of the communities we work with, they lack that support of a village and guidance. And that's what our program offers. So it offers it's a 4 weeks to 6 weeks programs where we really walk with young people through content around how do you choose a major, how do you find funding opportunities, how do you put in a competitive application, how do you write a CV, a personal statement, etc. And it is all delivered through refugee facilitators from the community. So we never directly deliver. And they deliver the program, as you can see, there's different modalities. We do in person, online, and self-study. And the point of offering different modalities is because people we work with come from different backgrounds and have different circumstances. Sorry, I thought I heard someone. But yes, you can see here just a quick overview and the cost per student, which is part of also evidence, finding out how much things cost and how can we scale them. If we go to the next slide, really, it's just an overview. Last year, we enrolled 1,800 students from different nationalities. And the next slide is also a really quick overview of our partners. So as you can see, we work with community-based organizations and local facilitators, refugees from the community. Now, I have 2 slides left, and I really want to spend the next 1 minute, 2 minutes on the data and evidence bit. So we collect a lot of data and evidence, and I think we've recently started to look at the guidance program as both a support mechanism, but also a living data set, offering us insights into barriers, motivations, and trajectories shaping the decisions around access to tertiary education. And while we have lots of indicators on short-term skills uptake and application and well-being and enrollment, I think if we are being genuine, we really do not know much beyond access. So we currently collect data right after the program ends, which is what at a feedback stage. So this is around how you found the program, etc. We reach out to students 6 weeks after, and we start asking them, have you used the skills? Have you applied? And then 6 months after to see if they have been accepted. Beyond this 6 months, we really do not know much. Beyond acceptance, we really do not know much. And this is, and while we do know, however, which I think is really important, that 66% use the skills within 6 weeks, and 45% of those who apply to tertiary education within 6 months, 45 of which are actually accepted or already enrolled. Again, beyond acceptance, we don't know much, which leads me to my last slide around what are we curious about. I think I was supposed to frame it as in what keeps me up at night. I'd be lying if I say this keeps me up at night. It really doesn't, but I'm super curious about it. And I think these 3 things, we're really interested to learn more about the long-term impact of guidance. So we have recently run a tracer study with some of our students who've graduated from 5 years ago. And one of the things that were really shocking, and I just want to share this to get us thinking, is that we found that around 75% of the students actually report sharing the information that they've learned with other peers organically. So we really want to, but it was a very small sample size. It was 32 students that we reached out to. So we're really interested to learn more about this long-term impact of guidance. We're also really interested about learning around evidence beyond enrollment. We've been so caught up in calculating and learning about how many actually access that we don't really know, I think collectively, what happens beyond access and what outcomes is there beyond access on refugee access to tertiary education. And the last thing, and I'll leave you with this, that we're super interested in, is learning more and collecting evidence about what it would look like to scale peer-to-peer solutions, to scale refugee-led youth solutions, and co-design these solutions with the communities we work with in a way that is scalable and effective and really expands reach. I'm already 1 minute over my time, so I'm going to stop here, but just to say thank you all for your time and handing it over back to Danielle.
Thank you, Mai. Thank you so much. But one thing I'll quickly note is in my introduction to you, I missed out the bio I was supposed to read out for you. And I'm, as someone who believes in giving honor to whom honor is due, I'll say quickly that Mai is an education and youth specialist dedicated to supporting young people in humanitarian crisis areas. She holds an MSc in Human Rights from the London School of Economics and is a PhD candidate at the University of Auckland. And she has designed and implemented youth programs in Jordan, Lebanon, Turkey, Tunisia, and Ethiopia. So thank you again, Maya, for your wisdom. So quickly, I'll pass to our next speaker. So next we have Dr. Abdullah Yassan. So Dr. Yassan is the head of department at Erbil Polytechnic University. His expertise is in international human rights law, and his multiple research areas include migration and immigration law, international humanitarian law, and durable solutions. So over to you, Dr. Yassan.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Thank you for having me. So I just focus on looking at the barriers of access to higher education in Kurdistan, and also some of the questions that is now kind of raising, it's happening now. That's what I wanted to look at, please. So can you go to the next slide, please? Yeah, so for the refugees, as I said, it's extremely important that they are part of they can have access to higher education. And so that what does it bring? It brings, of course, just to give you an overview, it brings, offers skills development, economic integration, employment opportunities, of course, and also a brighter future for them. And if you look at the Syrian refugees here in Iraq at the moment, and especially I'm focusing in Kurdistan region of Iraq, we have over 270 or 60,000 Syrian refugees. The 40% are in the camps, and the rest are in the urban areas. And these people have either access to higher education inside the camp, access to education inside the camp, or higher education outside the camp. So slide, please. But if you look at just to give you a bit of a number, you can see that only 7% of refugees are enrolled worldwide compared to the global, which was the 40%, 43% in 2023. Can you hear me very well, right? Okay, great. So the UNHCR has set as we said, my colleagues already talked about, but 50% figure by the 2030. As I said, I gave you the numbers. If I could just give you some more numbers, what I outlined is that from whole Iraq, we have only 70,000 school-aged children. Just 52% of our boys and 48% are girls. And the rate of school enrollment for the camp population it's about half of that, which is 51%, and 29% for only for the secondary education. And if you look at these numbers, you can see that what's the 29% are attending primary schools. I'm talking about the urban areas now, and only you can see that 63% of all that are not going to the school, which is quite a high number, to be honest, outside of the camps. So the lack of attendance you can see, and you can see the numbers even inside the camps are almost half, and outside the camps are even a higher rate. So if you go to the next slide, please. So what the UNHCR has done with the local the NGOs, and of course with the Ministry of Education here in Iraq, in Kurdistan, is there is a policy of integration education policy. This policy is part of what the initial view was, that Syrian refugees might be here only for a short term. Of course, they came in 2011, and it's now 2025. So they have been 14 years in the Kurdistan region. And you can see that there is no any way that they could go back because the situation is not improving. And we have done research elsewhere. Only 1% of Syrian refugees are intending to return to Syria. What that means, it means they are here to stay, which means they are here to stay. It's important that we highlight that there has to be a policy going forward. And UNHCR with the local actors have now, there is a policy in 2021 was developed, which was implemented in 2023, is looking at the integration policy for the education in order for the school children starting. Of course, it's a school children at the beginning, and now it has gone to the up to the year 1 up to year 7, that they have access to Kurdish language because that's the curriculum. And this way, it gives them an easy option in order to access employment in the future. Next slides, please. So the research question I was thinking about is how has the refugee education or integration policy, particularly for the secondary school certificates of recognition outside the KRI, and affected the refugee students' access to higher education in Kurdistan and would they be able, if they were part of this policy, would they be able to access higher education easier because they are part of the local studying through the languages, but also it's like the teachers are partly are from the local community. So that does help as well. Next, please. So what is the obstacle? And I think there are two obstacles at this moment of time. Number one is, as was also already highlighted by Daniel when he was providing it's number one is, and Elena as well, is the issue of recognition. Qualification recognition is a huge issue in Kurdistan at the moment, because some of the qualifications are from the areas which are autonomous areas like Rojava, and these autonomous areas qualifications are not recognized. In order to be recognized, they have to go through the embassy and has to go through the Syrian and that's in Damascus, and that's extremely difficult for these people. So the recognition is a huge issue. And the second issue, Sidi, can you please mute yourself? And the next slide, please. And not only the qualifications are sometimes difficult to be recognized, is they also once they graduate, which goes beyond the higher education now, once they graduate is the issue of employment as well. Which is extremely important, is that they are not allowed to work in the public sector, but secondly, they are also not allowed to work in the not only in the private sector. There is now a instruction by the KRI, by the Kurdistan region here, is that 75% of the employees has to be local, and that leaves them with only 25%. And that 25% are also cannot be from, for example, from dentistry, medical, from bar association, like lawyers. These people has to have, for example, even if they have finished. So for example, if I finish a law degree and a Syrian refugee finishes a law degree, I can practice as an Iraqi, but Syrian cannot practice, because this is just the bar association cannot provide or does not give license to lawyers to do. So what happens is mostly informal work. So so two issues I highlighted here. Number one is the recognition of qualification. And number two is once they graduate, is access to employment. Another issue with the access to employment is also business. Having your own business is also another issue. So for example, if I wanted to establish a business, and of course I need access to bank account, and that's a huge issue. So Syrians at this moment of time are not allowed to open a bank account in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, in whole Iraq. And that's a huge issue as well, because it gives them a little bit limitations in order to be able to maybe have your own business, or even if you work in a formal sector. So what happens, we have Syrian refugees, for example, had to go to UAE in order to open a bank account and come back to work in the local organizations or to work in the international organizations. So this is the kind of two issues where I find out maybe like Sadiq can be muted. Next slide, please.
That's it that we have for you.
Yeah, thank you so much. So what just to highlight a couple of things at the moment is happening. The UNHCR is, as it was highlighted by I think Danielle already discussed, was the issue of passport qualification. And I think passport qualification could be a great way of going forward. Unfortunately, at this moment, this is a discussion between Ministry of Higher Education in Iraq and Ministry of Higher Education in Kurdistan, also with the UNESCO being involved, UNHCR being involved, that still has not been recognized. There has been a pilot study about that, so it would be good to kind of maybe going forward is looking at this research. How does that work? How does that plan out? That's number one, thinking about future. Another thing to think about future is at the moment is RVA, recognition, validation, accreditation for non-formal and informal education. And that's also in Iraq, it's a bit of issue, because most of the people who are working in the formal sector or in the qualifications to the university can be recognized, but anyone else outside the informal or non-formal education, their qualifications are also not accredited. And that's also going forward. It's an area that maybe to research about. I'll stop here. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Yassine, for your insights, the implications of refugee integration policy, what the barriers are, and also at the end, potential possibilities that we can explore. So thank you. I'll pass now to our third speaker. So I'm very pleased to welcome Sam Pordell. So Sam is a student at the University of Warwick. His research, and he's also a research assistant. So his research focuses on enhancing higher education accessibility for refugees and asylum seekers. He is also an active member of the Universities of Sanctuary Strategy Steering Group, Strategy Group, and is also a member, I believe, of Student Action for Refugees Equal Access Activist Group. So Sam, over to you.
Thank you, Daniel, for having me today. And hello, everyone. I don't have any slides, so apologies. But I'm a sanctuary scholar in the University of Warwick. And when I joined university, I started supporting the English department on access to higher education and academic development for refugees and asylum seekers in Coventry. This project initially started in 2022, aiming to find barriers to higher education for our local asylum seekers in Coventry, and how Warwick, as the University of Sanctuary, can address and reduce these barriers. By the end of the first phase of the project, we understood that one of the barriers to higher education is that a lot of asylum seekers in Coventry do not feel welcome in university. And our participants for the first phase of the research responded that universities would be great to have an access course for asylum seekers so they can understand more on how to get access to university. And by understanding the barriers to education, by phase 2 of the project started in 2024, which we co-designed a 2-week access course to asylum seekers in Coventry by the support of Refugee Education UK and the Coventry City Council and our local asylum seekers in Coventry. So this 2-week access course had 3 strands. The first strand was to accessing to university. So in those 2 weeks, we had the support of Refugee Education UK and Warwick Wellington Participation Team that how our asylum seekers can apply to university. And the second strand of the course was seeking sanctuary in Shakespeare and how our participants can develop the academic English with critical thinking that they need for university, and how they can find belonging in literature. And the third strand of the project was life at university, how an average Warwick student spend their day-to-day life. By the end of this project, we had 12 participants who understood how to apply for university and how their day-to-day life will be in university. And a lot of them find it very welcoming. And one of the participants told us that this access could help them and made her to think about applying to university. And to what research keeps me up at night, while we were doing this research project, our hotels that hold asylum seekers were attacked by right-wing protesters, and they were kind of reciting poetry. And a few weeks later after that, Sir Keir Starmer announced the new immigration policies, which he quoted that England is in risk of becoming island of strangers. And it reminded me of one of the quotes that we had from our participant, which she said, some of the Shakespeare works still serve to day-to-day life, and it teaches us not to back down no matter what. This made me feel happy that I can say that Shakespeare fought for immigrants, and thanks to him, after 400 years, I can still walk around without fear. And this made me think that how politicians referencing Shakespearean language to provide a negative narrative for asylum seekers and refugees, and how we academics can use Shakespearean language and literature and poetry with access to higher education to resist this marginalization, and how we can use the literature to create sense of belonging and resist the marginalization. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Sam. I'm sure there are applause, virtual applause going around the room. Yeah, very powerful insights in terms of what's happening in the country right now in the UK, and the power of narratives and the stories that we create to both resist hostility and also to advance cultures of welcome. So thank you again, Sam. So moving swiftly onto the next part of the webinar, I'll pass now to Alana, who will introduce the next piece.
Thanks so much, Daniel. So thank you again to all the speakers for your really fantastic insights and really fantastic presentations about your areas of work, focus, the questions that are driving it, what sort of still sticks with you, and areas that you find we really need to focus on based on the barriers that you see in your day-to-day and at large. Before we go into the breakout group discussions, I do want to give us the opportunity to introduce some of our additional speakers, facilitators who will be leading the discussion sections, and give them the opportunity to take a couple of minutes to introduce themselves and to let you know what research they're focusing on in their current work, and maybe outside of it too, what drives them. So without further ado, I will pass over to Sally to introduce yourself. Please take the floor. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. It's quite late here in Australia. I would like to start by acknowledging that I'm meeting you on the unceded lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples here in Canberra, and pay my respects to traditional owners of the lands on which I'm meeting this evening. My name is Sally Baker. I am Chair of Refugee Education Australia. I'm an Associate Professor in Migration and Education, and very happily a co-lead of the new Refugee Student Settlement Pathway, which we are very proud and excited to welcome 20 students who are displaced in across the Asia Pacific, students displaced in Malaysia, India and Thailand, who'll be joining us at the end of this year or beginning of next year to commence their studies with a permanent protection visa here in Australia. Is a long time in the making, a lot of agitation and advocacies taking place to get to this point. From a research perspective, I am really interested in, increasingly interested in the ways that we support students in host, in settlement countries like Australia, the ways that universities and other tertiary education providers recognise, assess, consult, on the needs, preferences, desires of students who've experienced forced migration. I've worked with the lovely Rebecca Murray, who will introduce herself in a minute, to talk about the kind of bordering practices and the ways that welcome is extended or not. And in a colonial settler country like Australia, that kind of thorny question of welcome, what counts as welcome, is particularly political and weighty. I'm also really interested in postgraduate outcomes, and I've recently undertaken a very difficult randomized controlled trial of a new graduate capitals employability intervention that's designed with and for students who've experienced migration, but particularly forced migration. And so, yeah, that's kind of where I'm really interested in what happens when not just getting students in, but what happens during, particularly issues of language support, and then what happens post-graduation. And I love a bit of longitudinal qualitative tracking research. So that's really my vibe. And that's what I'm hoping to do with the RSSP, the Refugee Student Settlement Pathway, and another work. Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Alana. I'll hand back. Thanks.
Thanks so much, Sally, for that introduction. And as you mentioned, we also have colleagues Rebecca Murray and Miriam Tahir, who will be supporting as facilitators as well on the call. So I will go ahead and share my screen and hand the floor to them.
Thank you, Alana. So just to introduce myself very quickly before I pass over to my colleague Mariam, my name is Rebecca Murray. I'm a lecturer in sociological studies at the University of Sheffield in the UK. I also sit on the National University Sanctuary Steering Group. So I've been an academic for about, I don't know how many years now, about 7 years or so, but have a long history prior to that of work and continuing working with people who have experience of displacement at the grassroots level to create pathways into and opportunities within higher education. So to be as brief as possible in terms of what keeps me awake at night? I think I would first of all agree with everything that's been said before me. With every speaker, I would agree with all of the concerns people have raised and can make links to them in the UK and beyond in terms of my own experience. But in terms of my response to this question, it really is quite simple. And my kind of the thing that I think about the most is how we realise the right to higher education as outlined in the Declaration of Human Rights, which obviously there's a clear relationship to legal status and often lack of recognition as a citizen, and how if we could overcome that challenge, it would potentially resolve some of the issues people are facing. However, and this is because especially in the UK, but also in other contexts, huge change has taken place in terms of access to higher education, and so many more opportunities have been created. But so many of the changes we see are dependent upon discretion, kindness, and/or kind of academic exceptionality. So I'm interested in what we could do if we could kind of level the playing field in terms of the status issues people encounter. Secondary to, I also realised that to achieve a change such as this, which obviously requires legislative and more kind of structural change, is a long-term goal. So I think which can take time. So I think equally important to the kind of what we do or what our focus is, it's how we actually do it. And I have experience in the UK and other places where change has historically been led by people with experience of forced displacement. And I think essential to the future success is an ongoing commitment to co-producing a research agenda, and also creating a research agenda that has the capacity to translate research findings into tangible changes to practice, with the potential to achieve incremental change that affects the here and now, but also commits to a longer term, or a commitment to longer term kind of structural change. And also we need an agenda that accounts for existing research that's taken place, taps into existing sources of data and information, and connects those findings between the local and the global context. And just to draw your attention to a couple of pieces of research wherein in the UK with a group of peer researchers, we've endeavoured to, first of all, map opportunities in higher education in terms of scholarships and their impact in terms of graduation, retention, but also understand at scale the primary barriers that people encounter trying to access higher education. So that's a very quick insight to the research and the focus, the priorities I've identified. And I'll hand over to my colleague Mariam to talk further. Thanks, Mariam.
Thank you, Rebecca. Yeah, my name is Mariam. I work at City of Sanctuary UK, managing a network of universities known as the Universities of Sanctuary. And I myself also accessed university as a refugee through a Sanctuary scholarship, and was able to use my lived experience to work with the universities across the UK to support them. So we're kind of helping universities become places of welcome, belonging for those with displaced backgrounds by embedding different levels of inclusive practices across policy, culture, and community, a lot of it which mentioned by Rebecca and Sam. And similarly to Sally, the issue I'd be interested in is the question of progression and outcomes for people from displaced backgrounds. I think, as we saw before, it's a common area of interest based on the survey as well. And from my work in the UK, I feel we've made significant progress in identifying barriers to access and addressing those barriers, trying to improve the participation and the experiences of students whilst they're at university. And one example is the one that Sam shared earlier in Coventry, mentioning all the barriers and potential solutions to participation and successful experiences in higher education. However, what happens after university remains unknown. I think we have some understanding from the past, but we've little data or research that's current and updated about what post-graduation journey looks like. Future prospects, career pathways, and further study is where there's very limited research at the moment. And no kind of comprehensive kind of data that tracks this educational kind of or professional progression, which would be really interesting to see. And I think from practitioners' perspective that I work with and from working in the charity, filling this data gap would allow us to create effective support structures, but also help us to advocate for policy change and influence policy. Again, as Sam was mentioning before, around the changes in the legal landscape around immigration and allowing people to seek safety, etc., it becomes even more important to address this. So I'm really looking forward to discussing this and more. I'll be facilitating one of the breakout sessions. So yeah, really looking forward to hear everyone's insights on this. I'll pass back to Alana.
Thanks so much, Miriam and Rebecca and Sally, for your introductions. We're really excited to have you facilitating these upcoming breakouts with us. And I will try to give just a brief intro to those breakouts so you can jump in and actually start having those conversations and stop listening to individual speakers and get to talking to each other. So really briefly, we just wanted to put up on the screen for you to enter the breakout group with a couple of ideas in mind. The two primary questions that the breakout groups are going to consider. The facilitators and note takers will also help make sure that you have these questions listed in the chat of your breakout group and that you know which topic you're on, etc. But we want you to explore two areas. One, what do you see as the most critical or pressing gap in refugee higher education research? So you've heard from a lot of folks today on the questions that are driving their work, what they think is a priority. Now we want to hear from you. What is that gap? What is that thing that's really critical to understand or explore or creating challenges in refugee higher education research? And question number 2 is where we're going to start to ask you to prioritize a bit. If you could only conduct one piece of research to start to tackle those gaps in access to higher education for refugees, etc., what would you prioritize? You can consider your framing in, if I only knew or understood this, then I could achieve, advance, advocate for this. So we'd love for you to also, when you bring back your findings from your discussion groups to the plenary at the end, to think about framing in this way if you're able to. For this discussion, we really want to avoid coming up with a list of topics. We really want to see if each individual discussion group can start to prioritize just a few and to see what rises to the surface. We'd also like for you to get into, if there's time, what partners, resources, etc., might be needed or already available to support these topics, and then whether that research topic or topics would substantially serve and how it would serve the global 15 by 30 agenda, SDGs, etc. So those are some pointers. With that, I will start the breakout groups and we can settle into the discussion. So thank you in advance for your participation. So everyone, apologies for not stating at the start when we would be coming back, but I was trying to jump around a little bit around the rooms and not cut off any discussions super abruptly, but it sounded like there were some really interesting insights being brought up and discussed, and I want to give you time to share back with the group, but apologies for anyone who was cut off. So is there any group who would like to go first? Otherwise, I'm happy to cold call, but anyone who was getting into a topic that they really want to bring back and share, or anyone who was able to, if there was consensus or really interesting disagreements among the group, we would love to hear.
Perhaps we can get the ball rolling. We were the first group back, so we're saying we're very efficient in our conversations. But also, I'll also reflect that within our breakout room, there were a few different questions that we discussed, and what we really wanted to try and do was to integrate each of those points into some like a central research question, or maybe more sort of a research agenda. So essentially, what we discussed is that there's a need for us to have a better understanding of what interventions exist in terms of the interventions with that in terms of refugee higher education. Some examples were given in terms of ongoing work going on in sort of individual countries, work that's looking at sort of the effects of trauma. But I think in taking like a global perspective, we want to eventually get a sense of why interventions work, who do they work for, and in which context. And the way to go about that would be to get a sense of, okay, the different interventions, and then beginning to evaluate, asking that question of what works for who and where. In terms of the different interventions that exist, being able to have a sense of the outcomes that each intervention measures. So outcomes in terms of whether they're effective in dealing in trauma or sort of improving mental health outcomes. In terms of sort of economic evaluations, there are multiple sort of indicators of success within these interventions. So eventually we'll want to be able to answer that question: what works for who, what works for who, and in which context.
Thanks so much, Daniel, for sharing. I think the context piece was definitely a recurring theme, especially in our group as well. Miriam, can I ask you to share a little bit about our group?
Yeah, absolutely. So we had discussions around two general kind of wide areas, and one of them was a really interesting one, which is about the impact of state policy on how much refugees or students can contribute to their kind of society, the institution, in terms of outcomes as well of employment. We talked within this about the barriers that a lot of students face in accessing higher education, in terms of the fact that they may be classified as international students or banned from employment. And so this really impacts on the quality and the experiences that they have, essentially. And one of our group members, Emily, really mentioned great examples that she's seen in different countries, the disparity between the contribution, but also just the quality of experiences and educational and professional outcomes that students have based on where they study. Comparisons like Lebanon, Turkey, and as we were hearing from some of the presentations earlier, we're linking it to employment outcomes, work visa restrictions, etc. Some countries really welcome refugees, and they do it in a way that is inclusive, it's embedded. There aren't many restrictions on their employment relative to or in comparison to other countries, and that hugely impacts the experience of those students and their families, and the way they integrate and feel that they can contribute and really just fulfill or reach their full potential. And so that would be, it's a wide question. It overlaps with the outcomes and progression question or research. We were really interested in looking into that, and perhaps using some of those countries as examples of what worked really well. Why did it work? Why was it effective? Why were progression, academic and professional progression metrics or data better or higher in, for example, Turkey than Lebanon, comparing the different state laws and how that affects the way people navigate the systems, educational and professional systems. The other area that we talked about is the idea of universities as sponsors. One example is kind of community sponsorships, the model that is used in Canada with WASC, and pros and cons of this, and really just evaluating that in a critical approach to not just give universities a chance to do this and then kind of fill some kind of number or quota, but really critically evaluate the impact of it, the progression outcomes, the results of it on kind of economically, so economic evaluations, but educational success as well, as Daniel was mentioning, integration outcomes, what does it mean for their families, and partnering with really kind of experts in this area, organizations like WASC, for example, in Canada, to understand this a little bit more and challenge that question and see, the pros and cons of it, of those models. But we also recognized that maybe there is a little bit of a challenge, kind of just identifying one or two specific questions with everyone's research areas and fields being so diverse and focused on different things. But again, this could be a strength that we all bring in such different backgrounds and can contribute with really different questions and kind of narrow it down to the most important ones and prioritize it later on in future stages as well. I don't know, Alana, if you wanted to add anything from the notes that you took that I had maybe missed.
No, that was very comprehensive, Miriam. Thank you so much for sharing that and the excellent facilitation. Do either of the other two groups want to take the floor from Sally's or Rebecca's group?
I'm racing Rebecca. She couldn't press unmute, but quickly enough. I guess in our group, and obviously any of the group, please jump in. But we kind of we got to that second question of what if we want to employ, if we want to persuade or incentivize more provision of higher education opportunities, what would we need to produce for example, for universities, whether it's the development of a new complementary education pathway or a scholarship opportunity or more connected learning. So, for example, Australia's made no progress on connected learning. It does have an educational pathway. I think that kind of mapping of how well different countries, actually just thinking about it now, it's always useful to tell Australia that UK is doing something very well. I'm not sure that it necessarily works in reverse. But we talked about what we might need to know in order to kind of advance, discussions around the provision of resources. Gabriella was making the point that there's rarely not money for something. It's just about making the case for why that money should be spent on for example, a scholarship. And we were talking about the value of being able to, prosecute arguments using really well put together case studies that tell both speak to some of the challenges that people are experiencing, the kind of blocked pipelines that we were talking about in our group as key critical gaps in what we know is available. But we were also reminded that, of course, numbers always tell a really compelling story. So I guess it's about getting the settings right to be able to tell a longer term story about how students have been able to succeed. It's my strong view that WUSC has 50 years of really excellent student refugee data from their program that would be great to tell a story about, for example, tax contributions that would have been really useful when we were putting together the case for the RSSP in the UK. We were also talking about, being able to share, but not just academic outcomes, but also resettlement outcomes and broader integration outcomes. And then we were starting to get into a really interesting discussion about what kind, being able to tell a tale about what kind of contributions a higher education opportunity leverages for, things like remittances, or being able to contribute not just to civil society and obviously as a sponsorship piece. That's something that colleagues are really interested in, but also in terms of contributing back to family or back to, either to diaspora networks within host country or diaspora networks in other countries, like that kind of trickle through of what the opportunity can really bring, not just to the individual. So I guess, trying to maybe work with a human capital model when it suits. That's what universities know, that's what they like, but also then thinking about that broader social, tapping into all the SDGs and the broader social impact agenda. I think a more fulsome discussion of what that kind of package might look like to really push, whether it's funders or universities or state actors or others over the line, is that's where I think we got to in our discussion. But I can see Gabriella nodding. Did I miss anything? Gabriella, Hilal, Aruba, Francine, Mary, Hamir, or Cyprian? Okay, I think that's a thumbs up. Over to you, Rebecca.
Before I start, was there anybody in my group that did want to feed back? Because I realised at the very end we got cut off just as we were deciding whether. Feel free to add anybody. If there's anything you'd like to build on that I'm saying, I'll endeavour to keep this brief. I think within the conversation we were having, there was a lot to do with, I think the word connection came up, and thinking about how connected refugee learning is in terms of first of all about, well, I should start this by saying that broadly speaking within the group, the issues of access, there's a feeling that there's quite a lot of information on access or thinking about access to higher education, but what we really need to do is to better understand experiences within and beyond higher education. And thinking in terms of connecting and the connecting across the different individuals in our group and what they were saying, thinking about how we have a more connected understanding of progression from primary to secondary to tertiary and higher education. What do those transitions look like, and how can we support them and kind of minimize the disruption by displacement to those trajectories? Thinking about once people have crossed the threshold into higher education, into university, how is their experience of higher education? How does it connect to the wider student population? How does that facilitate feelings of belonging? And belonging can take on many different forms and ways of being, but I think also thinking about how people feel that they have the same access to different opportunities within university that extend beyond getting their degree program or their qualification. And how does that then connect with and support them in terms of thinking beyond higher education and accessing the labour market or further postgraduate education, depending on what their wants and desires and needs are. Dora in our group, who is speaking in terms of DAFE, was talking about a longitudinal study they're currently doing with DAFE graduates, which was really interesting in terms of the other kind of connections, the longer term impact of higher education on the lives of individuals and what that cumulatively means. And I think I want to repeat what Sally said about thinking about ways in which you can measure that, but there are many ways in which you can think about what the impact is of higher education in the longer term. And thinking, and again, Dafia looking at and Dora, you can speak to this study if I'm not speaking to it correctly. But also towards the end, we're getting into a bit of a conversation about how we look at the impact of different programs and how we look at that impact across different diverse contexts, be they resettlement contexts or displacement contexts. I think I'm probably might be overstepping, but think about how they all connect with each other. So rather than look at what obviously what is different between them, but also how they all connect together and what we can learn from them collectively. And I think also, and again, some really coming back to the belonging in higher education, some really practical things about how people, when they access higher education, if funding's cut, if something changes in their circumstances, how we can mitigate that impact so they can actually continue and complete their studies. And we also had a conversation about the role of higher education or universities. I'm probably not going to do this justice, but in terms of diplomacy and when people are in displacement kind of conflict context, what role can universities play beyond educating people and how they can help mitigate wider situations? So I hope that was a reasonable summary of the discussion. So yeah, thank you to everyone in my group. It was really insightful being able to talk to you all. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a brilliant share back. And I think it's exciting to see that there are a lot of common threads between what the groups are sharing back. Obviously, there's a lot of topics and a lot of areas of interest across this fantastic participation group today. But just in terms of the piece of context, and if we really want to incentivize more access, better access, all the elements of the within and beyond higher education that we're discussing, what do we need to produce? What do we need to focus on when it comes to research, but also the actions of all the different relevant stakeholders? So I think there's a lot of really good food for thought today. I would love to keep talking about this for much longer with this group. But in that sense, it's a really good thing that we do have the 15 by 30 conference coming up. So just as a friendly reminder, this is one of the pre-webinars for the conference that's helping to lay the groundwork for some of the sessions that we'll have then. This session is intended to set the scene for the Actioning a Refugee Higher Education Research Agenda session at the Congress, which will focus more on strengthening capacity, building partnerships, and setting commitments to try to start to action some of the priority topics discussed today. We'll also be sharing out some of the findings from this webinar with this group, as well as at the Congress itself. And I believe my colleagues will hopefully put the links for both the agenda and to register for the Congress in the chat. We still have vouchers available for those who may be in need of them to attend. So there's more information about that at those links as well. Finally, you will see a QR code on the screen, and I will put the link in the chat as well. That QR code is for a very, very, very short post-webinar survey in case you would like to share with us any research that you are currently doing, planning to do, or supporting in any way that is relevant to the topics that were discussed today. It is entirely optional, but in case you would like to share with us, we would love to hear from you and know more about the work you're doing to also help us think about for the conference itself, what areas of research are being done, what's already being prioritized, what are folks thinking about? And there's also the option in case we can follow up with you about anything that you share. Just in case you prefer not to, you can share, and that's it, just so we know some of the topics. But in case we can follow up with you, there's the option to provide that okay for us to as well. So I've put the link in the chat too, and the QR code's on the screen. And Manal has put the agenda in there for the Congress too. So with that is all we have for you today. Thank you so much for attending. Thank you to our facilitators. Thank you to our fantastic presenters. And thank you to my co-session organizer, Daniel, as well for today. And we hope to see you at the conference, and we'll follow up with the links as well to all attendees. So you'll have those in your inboxes too.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.